A shattered leg threatens a champion's career, but the real battle begins off the track. Alex Rayner crashed at 70 kilometers per hour during the Colorado Springs qualifying session, the world exploding into a chaotic blur of screeching tires, snapping metal, and the unbearable jolt of impact that reverberated through his entire body, leaving him sprawled on asphalt, his left leg screaming in agony as every nerve fired in protest, the femur fractured, ligaments shredded, muscles refusing to obey, and the titanium rod that would be inserted in a few hours seemed to already weigh on him like a foreign, unyielding anchor. Doctors speaking clinically in monotone, outlining the severity of the injury, the months of grueling rehabilitation ahead, the risk of permanent impairment, and the impossible 4-month deadline imposed by sponsors that pressed on him heavier than the bone itself, a psychological burden layered on top of physical devastation. And as the ambulance transported him to the private clinic of Emma Clark, the renowned rehabilitation specialist, his chest tightened, his muscles coiled with tension, knowing that every movement, every micromotion, would now be scrutinized, corrected, and meticulously recorded with relentless precision. And the moment Emma entered the room, authoritative, eyes sharp, tablet in hand, posture rigid and uncompromising, she assessed his condition, the slight tremor in his leg, the involuntary clench of his jaw, the shallow, irregular breaths, and stated plainly that in this room his fame, his social media following, and his ego were irrelevant. Only obedience, focus, and disciplined progression mattered, and any attempt to assert control or negotiate the process would be met with immediate, exacting correction. And though Alex tried to argue, to claim awareness of his own body and its limits, she cut him off sharply, her voice cold but precise, explaining that limits, pain, and pride were inconsequential. Only measured recovery counted, and for the first time he understood that surrendering to her authority might be the only path back to what he had lost, a bitter, humbling realization that ignited a mix of frustration, fear, and grudging respect, and the first week became a crucible of tiny victories and agonizing setbacks. Beginning with passive range of motion exercises, gentle flexing, assisted leg lifts, each movement painstakingly monitored, every micro-adjustment recorded, each jolt of discomfort a reminder of the titanium rod and torn ligaments beneath, muscles trembling from unfamiliar exertion, heart hammering, sweat dripping in rivulets down his back, and yet, beneath the agony, a strange recognition emerged. Emma's precision was not cruelty but necessity, born from experience, from loss, having herself once lost a dance career to injury, and her relentless attention was survival, not punishment, and by the end of the week, Alex could sit upright with effort, flex his legs slightly, bear minimal weight with crutches, and though the physical progress was incremental, the mental strain was immense. Every quiet moment alone in the dimly lit clinic a confrontation with helplessness, fear, and the enormity of the challenge ahead. And as he replayed the crash in his mind, the sensation of speed, impact, helplessness, and failure of control, the fear of losing the sponsors, failing the 4-month ultimatum, gnawed at him like acid, a pressure that made each breath a labor, each thought a battle. And when Emma quietly entered his room that evening, tablet in hand, offering water without preamble, her calm, neutral presence bore the weight of expectation, unspoken but undeniable, demanding trust, obedience, and precision, instructing hydration and preparation for partial weight-bearing the next day. And Alex realized fully that his survival, his career, and the chance to reclaim his life depended entirely on enduring pain, surrendering control, and following every instruction to the letter. And lying on the narrow hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, he visualized the track, the wind rushing past, the rhythm of pedals spinning beneath him, the freedom of speed regained, understanding that every agonizing session, every micro-adjustment, every deliberate motion was not punishment but reconstruction, methodically rebuilding body, mind, and resolve. And despite fear, pain, and uncertainty, a spark of determination ignited within him, the first ember of will that would carry him through months of unrelenting rehabilitation, a silent promise that he would endure, rebuild, rise, and one day ride again, faster, stronger, more precise. and with a control earned through suffering, discipline, and obedience. The first step in a brutal, punishing journey testing not only his body but his mind, patience, resilience, and capacity to trust someone other than himself in pursuit of survival, triumph, and mastery. While outside, Colorado Springs stretched quietly beneath the setting sun, wind whispering through the pines, indifferent to his pain, yet Alex Rayner, exhausted, trembling, yet resolute, understood that the path back to life, speed, and freedom had begun, and there was no turning back, only forward, step by agonizing step, breath by shuddering breath, until he reclaimed everything that the crash had tried to steal. The second week began with a subtle, unrelenting tension that threaded every moment at the clinic. Alex Rayner woke to the faint hum of monitors and the sterile scent of antiseptic, his legs stiff, muscles protesting the smallest movement. And when Emma Clark entered, tablet in hand, her presence was as precise and commanding as ever, eyes scanning every detail, noting the slight shift of his pelvis, the imperceptible tightening of quadriceps. And she did not speak softly, she did not smile, she issued commands with the economy of authority that brooked no argument. Partial weight bearing, crutches adjusted, hip flexors warmed. Begin 5 assisted steps. Focus on balance, control, and awareness of the rod. Do not rush. Mind dictates movement. Alex nodded, jaw clenched, teeth grinding against the pain that pulsed with each step, his mind calculating. The frantic electricity of nerves firing in rhythmic spasms. The rod in his femur, sending vibrations through nerves that had yet to acclimate to load. The stinging salt of exertion mapping the intensity of his focus, his pulse feeling like a trapped bird behind his ribs, and Emma's gaze was unrelenting. Her corrections minimal but precise, a shift of weight here, a subtle adjustment of crutches there, and Alex felt the paradox of relief and frustration. Her methods were harsh, unyielding, but undeniably effective, and after the 5th round, she paused, clipboard raised, noting improvements in micro-movements, alignment, and posture, before issuing the next set of instructions. 10 assisted repetitions of leg lifts. Maintain core engagement, shoulders relaxed. Pain is expected, but control is absolute. He obeyed, counting silently, every lift a test of endurance and will, each tremor of the muscles reminding him that recovery was measured in millimeters and seconds, not ambition or ego. Midway through the session, his concentration broke for a fraction of a second, a memory of the crash flashing, the wheel spinning, asphalt flying, the split-second decision that failed to save him, and Alex felt the old surge of panic, a flash of fear that made him stumble slightly, crutches clattering. Emma's voice cut through immediately, crisp, unflinching. Focus. Control. You decide whether to rise or fall. Not chance, not fear, only precision. Her presence was a tether, anchoring him to the moment, forcing him to confront not just physical pain, but the psychological aftermath of the crash, the helplessness, the dread of failing the timeline imposed by sponsors, the looming figure of Harvey Sterling hovering at the edges of his mind, calls unanswered, expectations ignored, and the knowledge that a single misstep could unravel everything he had fought for. After the session, Alex collapsed onto the bench, muscles quivering violently, sweat-soaked clothes clinging, breaths ragged, and Emma circled him silently, tablet recording every vital, every slight spasm, every micro-adjustment, before finally breaking the silence. Progress is measurable. Stability is improving. Core engagement increasing. Do not mistake this for readiness. One wrong movement could set you back weeks. Her voice was neutral, yet within the clinical detachment was a subtle acknowledgement of his effort, a recognition he had earned through sheer persistence, and for the first time, Alex felt a faint shift in their dynamic. He was no longer merely a patient under command. He was a participant in a precise, punishing dialogue, one measured in motion, endurance, and mental fortitude. Later that evening, as he lay in the narrow hospital bed, exhaustion pulling at every fiber, Alex's thoughts turned to Harvey Sterling, the agent whose voice had been clipped and sharp in previous calls, whose ultimatums had hovered over him like a guillotine. If Alex did not meet the 4-month deadline, the contract would be terminated, commissions lost, reputation tarnished, and Harvey would not tolerate distractions. not even emotional entanglements. Yet the image of Emma persisted, calm, exacting, her expertise both shield and pressure, and Alex realized that to survive, he would need to navigate not only his body's betrayal, but also the external forces pressing against him, balancing obedience, discipline, and the faint, stubborn spark of self-determination that refused to be extinguished. By the end of the second week, Alex had mastered the 10 assisted steps, added gentle hip rotations, and begun light-seated pedal motions, each repetition calculated, muscles trembling but cooperating, tendons slowly regaining memory of movement, ligaments adjusting to controlled load. And while progress was incremental, the combination of fear, discipline, and resolve began to forge a new rhythm, a delicate synchronization of mind, body, and will. While outside the clinic, Colorado Springs remained indifferent, the wind rustling pine needles, birds calling unseen in the distance, and Alex, exhausted yet quietly determined, understood that the true challenge had only begun, not merely to recover, but to reclaim control, to survive the punishing months ahead, and to prove, to himself, to Emma, and to Harvey, that he would rise from the wreckage, step by agonizing step, pedal by trembling pedal, until he once again dominated the track. The third week began with an intensity that felt almost cruel. Alex Rayner awoke before dawn, body aching from the previous day's micro-movements, muscles still trembling from the small but precise exertions, tendons whispering pain with every shift of the mattress, and the titanium rod in his femur throbbed with a metallic reminder of his fragility. Yet Emma Clark entered with the same unwavering authority, tablet in hand, her gaze scanning every micromotion as she assessed alignment, breathing patterns, tension in calves, glutes, and quadriceps, and without preamble she instructed, "Today we begin partial load on the stationary bike. 15 minutes at low resistance, focusing on smooth cadence. Do not favor the injured leg. Core engaged, shoulders relaxed, mental focus absolute." Alex obeyed. Every movement was a negotiation between fear, pain, and determination. Pedals turned under his trembling legs as ligaments stretched and muscles screamed in protest. His mind fought to stop, yet he forced compliance under Emma's unyielding observation. Each revolution was an exercise in patience. Each microcorrection became a lesson in control. In the background, the psychological weight of Harvey Sterling remained, a quiet, looming threat. The fear of contract termination was never far. He knew that every small success could be erased by a single misstep. During a brief pause, Alex sank onto the seat, sweat-drenched, legs quivering, heart racing, and Emma crouched beside him, adjusting resistance settings, her fingers deftly positioning his feet, her eyes meeting his for a moment, neutral yet acknowledging the effort he had just poured into controlled motion. "Do not mistake exertion for readiness," she reminded him. "Recovery is measured. One reckless repetition can undo progress. Mind and body must act in unison." Her words struck deeper than the physical instruction. They forced Alex to confront not just pain but patience, to understand that speed and glory were meaningless unless he rebuilt the foundation. That triumph demanded meticulous adherence to a schedule far slower than his desire to dominate the track. That evening, as exhaustion dragged at him with every breath, Alex reflected on the subtle tension growing between him and Emma, the rigid professional boundaries that seemed to bend slightly in fleeting moments of shared vulnerability, small hints, a slight nod of approval, a brief glance, a softening of tone, that suggested she saw him as more than a patient, that the relentless structure of therapy contained space for recognition, even empathy, and he realized that alongside the physical struggle was a psychological one, negotiating trust, dependence, and pride, while in the background, Harvey Sterling's calls and messages remained unanswered, his shadow looming, a reminder that failure carried not just physical consequences, but financial, reputational, and emotional ones, that every misstep in rehabilitation would ripple outward, and Alex felt the pressure tighten, a constant hum behind the physical strain. The third week ended with a new challenge, a controlled walking session with minimal support, each step a test of balance, stability, and courage, muscles quivering under the weight of the leg and the metal rod, ligaments protesting, but Alex pushed forward, counting silently, following Emma's exacting instructions, every slight sway corrected with a touch or a word, his pulse a heavy, dull thud of adrenaline against his temples, the cold sheen of effort covering his brow, and a deep, structural shudder running through his frame as he fought for stability. And when the session concluded, he collapsed into the chair, breathing ragged, legs trembling, body exhausted but mind ignited with a growing sense of achievement, small victories stacking invisibly, forming the foundation for the months ahead. And as he lay on the narrow hospital bed that night, staring at the ceiling, imagining the track, the wind rushing past, pedals spinning beneath him, he understood that recovery was no longer abstract. It was a series of deliberate actions, small triumphs, and each micro-movement, each repetition, was a step toward reclaiming everything the crash had taken, while Emma, outside the room, adjusted notes on her tablet, a quiet, invisible observer of his struggle, measuring not just progress, but the will, the discipline, and the resilience that would determine whether Alex Rayner could rise from the wreckage, defy the physical and psychological constraints, and once again, dominate the track, even under the unrelenting shadow of Harvey Sterling and the pressures of a world that measured worth by speed, victory, and control rather than patience, discipline, and survival. By the fourth week, Alex Rayner's body had begun to respond in ways that were subtle but undeniable. Muscles once stiff and uncooperative now held tone under careful exertion. Ligaments whispered their endurance with each movement. And even the titanium rod that had felt alien in his femur now seemed almost like an extension of his own body, though every step, every pedal, every controlled squat carried the memory of pain, the sharp reminders of the crash, and the ever-present shadow of Harvey Sterling's ultimatum, looming invisibly, a constant pressure in the back of his mind, threatening that one misstep could unravel months of painstaking rehabilitation. And Emma Clark's presence intensified, her authority unwavering. Yet within her measured instructions there were small, almost imperceptible shifts, a relaxation of strict boundaries that Alex noticed but dared not comment on. A subtle acknowledgement that recovery was not merely physical but emotional, and that trust, delicate, cautious, earned, was as vital as strength, balance, and coordination. One evening, after a particularly grueling session of controlled cycling, assisted squats, and delicate proprioception drills, Emma lingered in his room, tablet set aside, the soft hum of monitors filling the silence, and for the first time, the rigid clinical boundary softened not through words, but through a shared silence that acknowledged the weight of the journey. She adjusted the monitors with a lingering attention that wasn't strictly necessary, her gaze momentarily drifting to the window where the Colorado pines swayed in the twilight, and Alex, watching her, felt the first true shift from patient-doctor to a fragile, human recognition of the person behind the authority. The following days blurred with increasingly complex exercises, partial squats under her watchful eye, dynamic leg extensions, careful pedal sequences on a stationary bike designed to reintroduce cadence, timing, and subtle coordination, each motion recorded meticulously, analyzed, and adjusted. And the psychological stakes intensified as Alex recognized that these moments were also tests of trust. His obedience, his ability to balance pride and surrender, all under the invisible scrutiny of Harvey Sterling, whose calls went unanswered but whose presence hovered like a predator at the edges of his mind, reminding him that contract deadlines and financial imperatives were as real as the pain coursing through his body. It was during a controlled outdoor walk, one of the first beyond the clinic walls, that the professional mask Emma had worn so rigidly began to crack. She guided his balance with a touch that remained clinical, yet lingered a fraction too long to be merely functional. And as they moved through the filtered light of the pines, she spoke of the discipline required to rebuild a shattered dream, her words echoing his own internal struggle against the limitations of flesh and bone. And for the first time, Alex saw not a specialist, but a survivor whose own past echoed in every instruction she gave him. Back inside the clinic, that fragile understanding faced immediate external pressure. Harvey Sterling, dissatisfied with Alex's apparent distraction and delay in response, appeared unannounced, his presence sharp, demanding, like a knife cutting through the tension. And the moment he saw Emma guiding Alex along the clinic's garden path, smiling at a minor joke, he understood that distraction had occurred, that personal attachment threatened performance, and the warning was implicit but clear. Any deviation from focus could jeopardize Alex's career, and any perceived weakness would be exploited. Alex felt a surge of conflicting emotions: loyalty to his own recovery, the stirrings of connection with Emma, and the suffocating weight of external expectation, forcing him to reconcile desire, duty, and survival in a single, measured breath, step by step, petal by trembling petal. That night, as he lay on the narrow bed, muscles still quivering from exertion, heart pounding, he reflected on the precarious balance of progress, trust, and impending external threats, understanding that the road ahead would test not only the resilience of his body but the fortitude of his mind and the complexity of his emotions, and that success would require mastery over pain, obedience, strategy, and perhaps most perilously, the growing, unspoken connection with Emma that defied protocol, yet offered both solace and distraction, a subtle yet undeniable force in the unfolding calculus of recovery, ambition, and the human need for understanding amidst relentless pressure. By the fifth week, the boundaries Alex Rayner had once accepted as absolute began to blur, though he did not yet fully recognize it. Every session with Emma Clark pushed him further, not just physically but emotionally, a careful dance between instruction and connection, each micro-movement on the stationary bike, each assisted step, each controlled squat reinforcing the fragile tether between patient and therapist. And yet beyond the clinic walls, the shadow of Harvey Sterling loomed: calls unanswered, messages ignored, his omnipresent threat of contract termination and financial repercussions pressing down on Alex with quiet inevitability, a reminder that any distraction could be punished, any deviation from focus exploited. One late afternoon, as Alex attempted a new sequence of dynamic leg extensions and cadence drills, his body trembling from the accumulated strain of previous weeks, Emma lingered longer than usual, her hand adjusting a pedal, guiding his movement with a subtle gentleness uncharacteristic of her typical clinical authority, and for the first time, she allowed him to speak beyond monosyllabic responses to her instructions. I never realized how much I relied on control," he admitted, voice tight, the admission cracking the armor he had built around pride and fear. Emma paused, eyes locking with his, the faintest hint of empathy threading through her otherwise neutral demeanor. "Control is an illusion when the body betrays you," she replied softly, and in that quiet exchange, Alex felt a weight lift and settle, a strange blend of relief and uncertainty, the realization that he was no longer merely obeying commands but engaging in a shared effort of recovery, one that blurred the line between patient and human connection, testing the strict protocols she had enforced with such rigid precision. The days that followed were a delicate negotiation of trust, discipline, and emerging attachment. Outdoor walks extended into the quiet streets surrounding the clinic, Emma at his side, guiding, adjusting, but speaking more freely, sharing fragments of personal history, fears, and motivations, and Alex, despite the pressure of looming deadlines, felt a new determination not just to recover, but to earn that trust, to meet her precision with patience and effort, to navigate the growing tension between professional boundaries and human connection, and every step became a negotiation, every petal a challenge of endurance, fear, and subtle understanding, while Harvey Sterling's presence remained an unspoken specter, a reminder that personal feelings could not interfere with performance, yet did not diminish the connection forming quietly, imperceptibly, between them. That week's sessions became a test of endurance, not only physically but mentally. Alex pushed through controlled squats, pedal drills, and assisted walking sequences, each repetition a struggle against lingering pain, psychological strain, and the undercurrent of tension that now included both Emma's professional authority and the invisible presence of Harvey Sterling's manipulations, a dual pressure that challenged his focus, determination, and ability to discern between guidance and emotional influence, while the human connection he had begun to feel with Emma was simultaneously a source of strength and vulnerability, a tether that complicated the relentless regimen, yet infused each controlled motion with purpose, subtle emotional resonance, and the fragile recognition that recovery was not merely rebuilding muscle or ligament, but navigating trust, authority, and the complex interplay of human motivation under extreme pressure. And as he lay in the narrow hospital bed, each night, muscles quivering, heart racing, he understood more fully that the path to reclaiming his body, career, and autonomy would be measured not just in micro-movements and pedaling cadence, but in the ability to endure, negotiate, and survive the intricate web of physical, emotional, and external constraints, each day stacking on the last, a delicate tower of effort, precision, and will, waiting for the moment he would stand, ride, and face the world again, not as a passive athlete, but as one tempered by discipline, pain, and the emerging awareness of what it meant to trust another human being in the midst of chaos. By the 6th week, the clinic had become both sanctuary and battlefield. Alex Rayner's body was stronger, muscles holding tone under controlled load, ligaments negotiating tension with each careful step. Yet the psychological stakes had never been higher, as Emma Clark's subtle warmth and trust had been replaced by the sharp precision of a professional forced into rigid detachment. A reaction to Harvey Sterling's machinations, the young agent's interference having injected an invisible, toxic tension into every session. And the moment Alex realized this was when he noticed the shift. Instructions became clipped, eyes less forgiving, corrections delivered with a cold, mechanical efficiency that erased the fleeting moments of connection he had begun to feel, and the first true crack of frustration appeared within him, a mixture of confusion, anger, and helplessness, questioning whether he had done something wrong, whether the trust he had started to build had been illusory. Yet the sessions pressed on, each repetition, each pedal rotation, each assisted squat now carrying the dual burden of physical strain and emotional uncertainty, muscles trembling, joints aching, sweat dripping, heart hammering, mind straining to reconcile pain, discipline, and sudden withdrawal of human warmth, every motion a testament to endurance under duress. Emma's withdrawal was deliberate and precise. She knew the stakes and understood Harvey's threats were not empty, that the agent's leverage could end her career, and so she enforced clinical detachment with unflinching rigor, issuing commands with no softening, guiding movement with the same exacting standards, but no acknowledgement of effort or small victories. Her gaze clinical, unreadable, voice clipped, and Alex, exhausted, frustrated, and emotionally raw, attempted to push forward, to interpret her sudden coldness as professional caution. Yet each session left him more aware of the gap that had formed between them, a void now filled by tension, speculation, and the aching question of whether human connection in the midst of rehabilitation was possible or merely a dangerous distraction. The psychological strain intensified one evening when Alex, after a particularly grueling pedal sequence and controlled squat set, collapsed into the chair, sweat dripping, muscles quivering, and tried to seek reassurance, a simple word of acknowledgement. Yet Emma, maintaining professional detachment, simply recorded his vitals, adjusted his leg placement, and stated, "Focus. Recovery is measured in progress, not emotion. Tomorrow we repeat, refine, and improve. Emotion is irrelevant." The words struck hard, the cold precision cutting into the fragile trust he had nurtured, and for the first time, Alex felt the raw edge of anger, the sense of betrayal, the unmooring of hope, a psychic wound layered atop physical exhaustion. Yet he pressed on, driven by an instinctive need to reclaim his body, prove endurance, and assert control over the only domain left to him, his own recovery. That night, alone in the narrow bed, muscles trembling, heart racing, he replayed the moments of warmth and subtle connection he had shared with Emma, contrasting them against the abrupt detachment imposed by Harvey's interference, understanding fully now the stakes, the human cost, and the ruthlessness of the environment in which he operated, and he vowed silently that his endurance would not be broken, that despite manipulation, control, and the emotional vacillation imposed by forces beyond his body, he would persevere, regain strength, and confront both physical and psychological challenges with relentless determination. By the end of the 6th week, subtle progress was still visible. Improved range of motion, increased pedal cadence, controlled partial squats without assistance, and a strengthened mental focus forged through months of discipline and stress. Yet the human element, the connection with Emma, remained fractured, a delicate thread stretched to its limit, waiting for the moment when circumstances, trust, and choice would allow it to mend or break entirely. While Harvey Sterling's unseen presence continued to manipulate the calculus of every decision, every motion, every fleeting emotional shift, a constant reminder that the path back to control, freedom, and personal agency was as much psychological as it was physical, and that true triumph required navigating not only bones and ligaments, but the intricate terrain of human emotion, authority, and interference. By the 7th week, Alex Rayner's rehabilitation had reached a stage where physical progress was undeniable, but psychological tension had reached its peak. Muscles now held strength under controlled resistance. Ligaments accommodated load with fewer protests. Pedal cadence on the stationary bike was approaching pre-crash levels. Yet every session carried the weight of unresolved conflict. The lingering coldness from Emma Clark and the invisible, suffocating pressure of Harvey Sterling, whose calls remained unanswered but whose presence loomed like a shadow over every decision, every movement, every micro-expression, and Alex felt the duality acutely. His body was responding, yet his mind wavered between trust, anger, and resentment. The interplay of authority, care, and external manipulation creating a constant tension that threatened to derail progress. During this week, Emma maintained a calculated professional distance, her instructions delivered with a clipped efficiency that masked the internal pressure of Harvey's ultimatum. Every correction was a defensive wall built to protect her career and Alex's focus. Yet the very rigidity of her silence became a shared language between them, one where Alex began to sense that her coldness was not a choice, but a tactical withdrawal necessitated by the shadows moving at the edges of the clinic. One day, mid-session, Alex executed a full cadence pedal drill under Emma's watchful eye, legs trembling but precise, heart pounding. And as she adjusted his form with exacting precision, he noticed her fingers brush lightly against his wrist, an almost imperceptible touch, quickly withdrawn, yet enough to ignite a flurry of emotions: recognition, anger, longing, frustration, and the subtle warmth of human connection returning, however fleeting, yet immediately shadowed by the awareness of Harvey Sterling's potential reaction, the threat of career sabotage, and the necessity to maintain absolute focus on recovery. The delicate balance between personal desire and professional survival, now the primary challenge beyond the physical. Harvey Sterling's interference escalated as Alex's apparent distraction grew. He bribed a medical aide to capture photos of Emma in Alex's room, attempting to manufacture scandal and enforce obedience through fear, and when confronting Emma directly, he issued an ultimatum that threatened her license and career, the words sharp and deliberate. Either you force him to focus solely on training, or I report you to the board. Your career ends tonight. And Emma, calculating, responded with the precise coldness required to shield both herself and Alex, a calculated withdrawal of warmth and human connection, and Alex, witnessing this shift, felt a complex storm of emotions: confusion, anger, betrayal, and yet determination, channeling the emotional turmoil into relentless physical effort, pushing through assisted squats, partial weight-bearing drills, and pedal sequences, muscles quivering, heart racing, mind focused on the delicate interplay of survival, endurance, and emerging strength. By the end of the 7th week, Alex's body had reached the threshold of professional readiness, but the air between him and Emma remained heavy with the unspoken tension of Harvey's threats. He could now push the pedals with a fierce, controlled power that mimicked his pre-crash form. Yet every glance toward Emma was met with a gaze that had retreated behind a clinical barrier, a necessary silence that shielded them both from the scandal Harvey was so desperate to manufacture before the season start. Race day arrived with a tension that could be cut with a knife. Alex Rayner stood at the starting line, muscles taut, mind a whirlwind of calculation, pain memory, and anticipation, helmet secured, bike polished to a reflective sheen. Yet every heartbeat echoed not just the countdown, but the months of relentless rehabilitation, the harsh discipline enforced by Emma Clark, and the unrelenting specter of Harvey Sterling. whose voice and ultimatums had haunted every pedal stroke and squat, and now, finally, the culmination of effort, fear, endurance, and human connection would be tested against the roar of the track, the pressure of spectators, and the unforgiving metrics of time. Emma had returned for the day, detached yet present, her eyes scanning each detail, posture and motion, clipboard in hand, silent acknowledgement passing between them. No words, just the subtle recognition of preparation, trust, and the precise execution of months of training, while Harvey Sterling, lurking at the edges, observed with a smile that concealed both calculation and expectation, unaware that Alex's determination had been tempered not only by physical recovery, but by the psychological complexity of months navigating authority, connection, and manipulation, and that the real challenge was not simply to win, but to assert agency over his own body, career, and decisions. As Alex prepared to mount his bike, Harvey Sterling approached, feigning a final check of his helmet straps. His voice, low and devoid of warmth, hissed directly into Alex's ear, "Don't fail me today." One lingering look at Emma, one hesitant second on a turn, and those photos of her rehabilitating you after hours will be on the ethics board's desk before sunset. You get the trophy, she gets a lifetime ban. Keep it clean, Alex, and I might just forget she exists. Harvey patted his shoulder with a staged, encouraging grin and stepped back, leaving Alex in a vacuum of cold fury that instantly displaced the last traces of fear regarding his leg. This was no longer just a race for speed. It was a war to protect the only person who had seen him as something more than a high-priced asset. The starting gun fired. Muscles reacted with practiced precision. Legs pumped. Heart hammered. Every fiber of his body was attuned to cadence and balance. Memory of the crash lingered at the edge of his perception. It was a shadow that demanded respect, but no longer dominated him. Each pedal stroke was a negotiation between fear and strength. The titanium rod was now an integrated part of his motion. Pain was present, but he harnessed it. Emma's presence offered silent validation. She was his tether to discipline, guiding his focus without a single word. As the laps progressed, Alex began to pull ahead, control and technique refined through countless repetitions translating into fluid motion. The roar of the crowd a distant hum compared to the mental calculus of power, balance, and endurance. And then, as he crossed the final stretch, adrenaline and months of effort converging, he surged, setting a new track record, muscles screaming, lungs burning, mind honed to the apex of performance. And when he crossed the finish line, victorious, the triumph was not just physical but psychological, a reclamation of control, resilience, and self-determination. Yet the presence of Harvey Sterling in the crowd reminded him that victory would not be unchallenged, that manipulation, reputation, and exploitation remained as real as the medals now pressed against his chest. In the moments after the race, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, Alex caught a glimpse of Harvey Sterling speaking into a sleek, encrypted phone near the team tent, his back turned to the crowd. Alex slowed his pace, the hum of adrenaline allowing him to catch the clipped, triumphant words. The photo worked perfectly. She's back in line, and the distraction is neutralized. He's won the race. That's all that matters now. And in that instant, the full scope of manipulation became clear, the realization igniting anger that had been tempered into endurance. And without stepping aside, without issuing a standard ceremonial speech, Alex addressed the cameras, his voice resolute, unwavering. I will not race in a sport where people are threatened, manipulated, or coerced. Contracts that rely on fear are meaningless to me. Effective immediately, I terminate my agreement with Sterling Agency. The crowd froze, the tension thick, reporters scrambling, Harvey's expression a mixture of shock and forced composure. And Alex, in that single declaration, reclaimed agency, dignity, and moral authority, the culmination of physical recovery, emotional endurance, and psychological awakening converging into a singular act of defiance and self-determination. Later, in the quiet shade of the Garden of the Gods, Alex sought Emma Clark, finding her free from the constraints of the clinic, her presence unguarded yet composed. And for the first time, they met not as patient and therapist, but as equals, survivors of a crucible of pain, manipulation, and trust. both understanding that the past months had forged a bond tempered in adversity, and together they stepped forward, not with professional obligation, but with human choice, ready to rebuild trust, connection, and life on terms of honesty, autonomy, and shared respect, leaving behind the trauma, pressure, and manipulation that had defined the preceding months. Weeks after the season opening race, Alex Rayner found himself walking along the foothills of the Front Range, the wind carrying the scent of pine and freedom, muscles still sore from training, but body finally at peace with itself, mind clear for the first time in months. And there she was, Emma Clark, standing near a rocky overlook, casual attire replacing the strict uniform of the clinic, eyes scanning the horizon, posture relaxed yet deliberate, a quiet strength that had always commanded attention without the rigidity of professional authority. And Alex approached not as a victorious athlete, not as a patient, not as someone defined by contracts, speed, or expectation, but as a human being seeking connection, understanding, and shared honesty. As he reached her, Emma didn't reach for her tablet or check his gait with a clinical eye. Instead, she simply leaned against a weathered sandstone pillar, her hands tucked into her pockets, a posture of vulnerability he had never seen in the clinic. When she finally looked up, the sharp, analytical edge in her eyes had dissolved, replaced by a quiet, tired warmth. "I spent months telling you that emotion was irrelevant, Alex," she said, her voice missing its usual rhythmic authority, sounding almost fragile against the mountain breeze. "But watching you stand up to Sterling, for the first time in my career, I wanted a patient to ignore every single one of my protocols." She reached out, not to adjust a sensor or correct his posture, but to briefly rest her hand on his forearm, a gesture that was neither calculated nor recorded, marking the exact moment the specialist finally stepped aside to let the woman remain. Their initial words were simple, measured, yet loaded with months of unspoken tension, trust, betrayal, and survival. Alex broke the silence first. I wanted to find you. Not as a rider, not as a patient, just as me." Emma's gaze softened, the walls built over months of manipulation and professional detachment finally easing. "I waited," she replied quietly, not out of obligation, but because it mattered. What we had, it wasn't just protocol. Alex nodded, the weight of months of struggle dissolving in that acknowledgement, recognizing the mutual understanding and respect that had been forged through endurance, trust, and unrelenting human complexity. Together, they walked along the trail, feet crunching on dry earth and gravel, the vast expanse of the mountains stretching before them, discussing life outside the artificial confines of clinics, deadlines, and manipulations, sharing fragments of dreams once postponed, fears once concealed, and the quiet joy of discovering connection unbound by circumstance. Alex spoke of future rides, not as competitions, but as personal challenges. Emma shared the possibilities of a life rebuilt on her own terms, both laughing softly at memories of protocol, ultimatums, and the absurdity of the pressures they had endured. And in those moments, the mountains and the open sky became symbols of choice, autonomy, and the simple human right to trust, connect, and rebuild. The final step in their journey was unspoken but mutual, letting go of the past, acknowledging the manipulation, fear, and pressure that had defined the months prior, and embracing the freedom to define the future together, not as hero and healer, not as athlete and therapist, but as equals, partners navigating life on shared terms. Each step forward a deliberate act of choice, honesty, and connection. The crash, the rehabilitation, and the manipulation now behind them, leaving only the open horizon, possibility, and the presence of another human being who had endured, survived, and emerged alongside them. As the sun dipped low, casting gold across the rugged peaks and sandstone spires, Alex and Emma paused, hands brushing, eyes meeting, and the silence spoke louder than any words. A future unshaped, yet filled with trust, honesty, and the quiet understanding that their journey, physical, emotional, and moral, had prepared them not just to survive, but to live fully, freely, and together.